The New York Jets and the Washington Commanders linked up for a joint practice. They've got a game on Saturday. What we saw on Thursday, what it means and what it might mean for the first preseason game of the season for both teams coming up on this crossover episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in Commanders fans, New York Jets fans, to this crossover episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your hosts, David Harrison of Locked On Commanders, John Butchko of Locked On Jets. We're here with you every Monday through Friday. Appreciate you coming through for this crossover episode. And everydayers, we appreciate you for being everydayers, being part of the best parts of this network. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders or the New York Jets. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode. On this episode, we're going to talk about protecting quarterbacks. Both these teams have quarterbacks that need protecting in somewhat different ways. So we're going to talk about the ways that these teams could possibly do that. We're also going to talk about some players to watch, both on the surface, but also deeper in the depth chart this Saturday when the Jets and Commanders face off in the first preseason game of the season. But we're going to start it all off with joint practice reactions, observations, any surprises or non-surprises in some cases. If you want to discuss all of that stuff, of course, you can drop your comments in the YouTube sections or find us in any other way that you can. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. It helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. John, starting off with joint practices. Wet and rainy Thursday morning into the afternoon. And the New York Jets, Locked On Commanders fans have already heard me kind of rant a little bit about this, but on offense, on defense, I don't know about the special teams. I don't know how the special teams kickers or the Jets kickers did on Thursday per se, but I know the Commanders kickers did not do well. So I'm just going to go ahead and chalk that up as a loss for Washington as well. And even in some cases, the coaching, there were some procedural issues. There was a time where Joe Witt Jr. was trying to rush some defenders on the field, couldn't get the guys he was replacing off the field in time. And the Jets wisely snapped the ball and got a free 5 yards in a game scenario drill and that one. So even from a coaching standpoint, just all three phases and on the sidelines, Washington Commanders can't possibly be happy with what they saw on the field. What were your thoughts as this joint practice was going on from what was happening on the field out there?
Well, David, it's great to be with you today. I was trying to pick which of my two bad jokes I was going to make. The first is that, it's preseason for us too here on this first crossover episode of the year. So go easy on us, listeners. My other joke is not really a joke, is last time we did this was before the game these teams played before Christmas Eve last year. Yeah. I'm honestly more excited about this preseason game than I was that Christmas Eve game, because both teams were out of the race. It was actually ended up being a pretty exciting game, but I think it's always great to have football back. I think the number one thing that stands out is the New York Jets held Aaron Rodgers, decided to keep Aaron Rodgers out because the weather was bad. Rodgers, of course, is coming off the Achilles injury that ended this season after 4 plays last year. And Jets obviously are going to be very cautious with him, bringing him along, although by all accounts, it's healed well, but there's no reason to put him out there. Aaron Rodgers knows how to play football. One practice, missing one preseason practice is not going to be a big deal. But Tyrod Taylor, by all accounts, had a pretty good day. And I think heading into last offseason, the one guarantee you could have about the New York Jets was they were going to go get a veteran backup quarterback because of what happened last year. They entered the season with Zach Wilson. I was among the people this time last year. I was saying, you guys are talking about you're trying to develop Zach Wilson from the bench. Why are you putting him one injury away from being your starting quarterback again now? Obviously, nobody could have projected Rodgers would go down the first series of the season, but the Jets, I think Tyrod Taylor did what you wanted him to do. You're expecting him to find the open receiver. You're expecting him to throw accurate balls. You're expecting him to play smart football, and by all accounts, that's what he did. And look, if the Jets lose Rodgers again 4 plays into the season, I don't know if Tyrod Taylor's going to be able to save the season, but I think in my mind, when you get a backup quarterback, you're doing it for more of a medium-term stretch, or a short to medium-term stretch, where if your quarterback misses a month, maybe the backup is good enough to be a bridge that can keep you afloat and maybe win you a game that could decide your seeding or even whether you make the playoffs. So I think, it's always the quarterback position. Maybe we focus a little bit too much on the quarterback during these practices, but look, when Aaron Rodgers is not there, the Jets are going to depend on Tyrod Taylor to play competent football. And by all accounts, that's what he did in this practice.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely was putting the ball in some good places against that Washington Commanders defense, and unfortunately, unfortunately for me and my listeners, Washington Commanders were not necessarily doing the same thing on the other side of the field. So they have both these fields going at the same time. Both first team offenses and defenses were on the field at the same time, going up against each other on separate fields at the practice facility. And John, that Jets pass rush was causing some problems for Jaden Daniels. They were getting pressure up the middle. They were getting pressure around the edge. Now, granted, three of the starting offensive lineman for the Washington Commanders, right tackle Andrew Wiley, left tackle Brandon Coleman, the rookie out of TCU, and right guard Sam Cosmi were all missing in the team drills. None of them participated in the team drills. But bottom line is, if you're an NFL offensive lineman, you need to give your quarterback, especially a rookie quarterback, a little bit of time to breathe down there. And too many times, Jets defenders were around Jaden Daniels' feet, or they were coming around the edge. Will McDonald actually hit Jaden Daniels' arm at one point in time, which, of course, Cliff Kingsbury, Dan Quinn, both immediately reacted to that, as they should. I'm sure Will McDonald immediately apologized, and he did not do that again, as players don't want to hit the quarterbacks during practice. Well, they probably want to hit the quarterbacks during practice, but they're not allowed to anyway. So, any surprises from you? Because that's kind of one of the things that we've been talking about here is how much of this is really concerning for Washington, because certainly there's some questions being raised, and it's only one practice, so you don't want to get too crazy. But how much of this also is that the Jets just have a really good pass rush and a really good defense? Any surprises from you when you hear, well, Washington was missing three of its starting offensive linemen, and they've got a rookie quarterback back there, so of course the pass rush was getting home.
Yeah, I mean, look, this Jets team, this Jets defense is really talented. I mean, they're going to have a lot of success against starters. And look, we know from experience the Jets had 13 offensive linemen play at least 80 snaps last year. And the Jets made some personnel mistakes last year on the offensive line, but part of the issue is they just had injuries. You can't, if you're throwing at three new offensive linemen, I don't care who you're going against, you're going to struggle. And the Jets have a talented pass rush, even without Hassan Reddick. And David, I'm just going to talk to the Locked On Jets listeners a little bit. Did you hear what David just said? You hear about how Will McDonald got to the quarterback. Maybe this freak out the fan base is doing that. He's getting second team reps in the preseason. Maybe we can calm down a little bit, as I've been saying. Hopefully that'll calm some nerves up there. But yeah, look, this is a really talented unit. As I mentioned, Hassan Reddick's holding out, but even without him, they have some really good pass rushers. Quinnen Williams in the middle of that defensive line was a first-team All-Pro 2 years ago and didn't put up the sack totals last year, but drawing double teams on 70% of the snaps, he played at a very, very high level last year. Jermaine Johnson, part of the Jets' vaunted 2022 draft class, made the Pro Bowl last year. Will McDonald, first-round talent, they're looking for him to take the next step this year because he didn't really do much as a rookie. But there's a lot of talent on this defensive line. Look, I mean, this Jets defensive line is going to make a lot of offensive lines look bad. So I would not be if I'm a Washington Commanders fan, I don't know that I'd be overly. I don't know how the state of the starting offensive line in Washington that well, but you go to any backup offensive line, I'll tell you, I think any of the 31 teams against this Jets defensive line, if you're throwing three new starters in there, three backups into the lineup, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's going to be a problem for sure. And again, it's the issue comes in, John, that there's so much excitement, so much hype. I mean, Peter Schrager is on Good Morning America or Good Morning Football the morning of this practice, telling people you're sleeping on the Washington Commanders, and then they come out against the first time against an opponent not wearing burgundy, and they essentially lay an egg. The worst practice of training camp so far. So I think all of those chemicals mixed up kind of lead to it. Certainly some questions need to be answered in Washington. Let's not sugarcoat it, but the sky is not falling, as they say. And there's certainly still some good stories out there to keep an eye on. Some good players that are trying to make names for themselves. Some players with already have made names for themselves that have something to prove this preseason. John and I are going to dive into some of those names coming up next on this crossover episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors, and eBay Motors is bringing you passion, drive, and patience, because the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die vehicle alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle or even level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you will get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So get that passion, drive, and patience going. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Who are some of the players that you should be looking out for when the New York Jets host the Washington Commanders this Saturday afternoon for preseason game number 1 for each franchise? We're going to get into that here. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders and Locked On Jets your first listen today. For your second listen, take a turn over to Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get your daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies, so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And John, let's turn it over to you, man. You're the host city, host team, New York Jets. I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit player that still has something to prove here on the field in this preseason game number 1. I'll let you go whichever direction you want to go, but who's somebody from the Jets side of things that you're looking out for on Saturday to maybe make a name for himself or make some plays?
Yeah, I spoke a lot about this on Locked On Jets on Thursday. It's a guy you actually mentioned, a guy I spoke to my audience about. It's Will McDonald.
Nice.
Will McDonald was a shocking first round pick last year. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say it was shocking. And, I had not talked once about Will McDonald in the lead up to the NFL draft. And I started questioning myself. I said, should I have mentioned Will McDonald? Like, how did I miss this? And then I actually searched on Twitter, Will McDonald Jets, and literally nobody who covered the Jets had mentioned his name once in the lead up to the draft. It was a really surprising pick, in part because defensive end was not a need at the time for the Jets. But
Yeah.
sometimes picks end up being really good for your team, and they don't necessarily address an immediate need because rookies don't always step in and play great. Sometimes you wait till year 2, even when a guy addresses a need. The Jets remade what was a really good defensive end room last year. They completely overhauled it, even though it was very effective. They traded John Franklin Myers, who's been an excellent starter for them over the last couple of years. They traded him to Denver, and it was kind of a salary dump, a move that I'm not sure I entirely understand. They also let Bryce Huff, a talented youngster who just had a breakout season, had 10 sacks, played less than half the snaps last year and still had 10 sacks. And prior to last year, did not get a lot of playing time, but was incredibly efficient at producing pressures. They let him go to Philadelphia. They traded for Hassan Reddick, but Robert Saleh likes to rotate his defensive linemen in and out. It's a philosophical thing with him. He views, I think part of his mantra is that when you have the lead in the fourth quarter, you don't want your defensive lineman to be gassed. You want your pass rushers to be fresh, but he also doesn't want to lose. He doesn't want to lose quality when he puts his backups in. So the way I view it, if you look historically at the Jets snap count under Robert Saleh, it's essentially like you have 3 starting defensive ends. So you have Jermaine Johnson, who I mentioned, a Pro Bowler last year. You have Hassan Reddick, who's holding out right now, but I still think he's going to be back by week 1 because, is he going to leave $14 million on the table? It's one thing to skip training. Yeah, I've said this on the show. Like, I think part of this, he just doesn't want to come to training camp, and it's an excuse because he's a veteran player, and veterans want to skip training camp. But that third guy's going to be Will McDonald. He's going to see a starter share of snaps, and there's been some concern about him because even with Reddick out, he hasn't been getting first team snaps with this team. And there could be a lot of different reasons for that. It could be a motivational thing. There are some other potential explanations, but the fact it wasn't just this week or earlier in the week before the Commanders came to town. It seemed like his game was starting to elevate a little bit. And I think that, if he goes out and has a big performance this weekend, it's the type of thing that could calm some nerves around the team. It could establish him as one of those 3, what essentially are one of the 3 starting defensive ends the Jets have.
Yeah. Will McDonald is something that actually I did a little bit of studying on before the draft that year. And yeah, legit talent in that guy. I don't know the whole story, what's happened since he's got to New York or anything like that, but I do remember studying him. Something that I didn't study, John, when he was drafted last year was Manuel Forbes. And I say I didn't study him because I looked into him and I kind of looked at what he did at Mississippi State. That's not really a fit for the Jack Del Rio, Ron Rivera defense that Washington currently has. So I don't think he's necessarily in play. Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, however, was a guy that most of us didn't think would slip that far. But if he did, we were like, that's a slam dunk. And I can tell you from being in the draft room or being in the media room at the NFL draft, or during the NFL draft at the Washington Commanders compound, that when they came on the clock and Christian Gonzalez was sitting there, we're all getting our tweets ready. Christian Gonzalez, Washington Commanders cornerback. Instead, they go Emmanuel Forbes. Didn't really make a lot of sense then. Currently doesn't make a lot of sense because he didn't fit what they did last year. Clearly had one of the worst rookie seasons on record in recent memory. And this year, something confusing that happened with him is basically gotten all of the first team reps. He's all of his reps have been first team reps, if not all of them, 98% of them. But then when the first depth chart came out, he's second. He's a second stringer on the depth chart. So I was kind of curious coming into the joint practice: is Emmanuel Forbes going to be first teamer in the joint practice, or is he going to get second team reps because that's where he's on the depth chart? He got first team reps in the joint practice. So they continue to play this second stringer as they list him on the depth chart with the first string defense, and he got worked by Garrett Wilson. Not just Garrett Wilson, but specifically by Garrett Wilson, to the point where there's a video out there of what sounds like an 11 or 12-year-old child basically calling the shot that Garrett Wilson's about to cook Emmanuel Forbes, and then he does in fact cook Emmanuel Forbes. So it's unfortunate because Emmanuel's a good dude, but the fit and the talent is just not marrying up. And right now, it's also not marrying up because not only is Garrett Wilson torching Emmanuel Forbes in training camp practices, so is Terry McLaurin. So this game is incredibly important for Emmanuel Forbes because there's a certain element of, is he a gamer? And right now, as of last season, Emmanuel Forbes is not a gamer. Can he be a gamer now? Can he go out there against the New York Jets, whether it's first team reps, whether it's second team reps, and make up for some of the mistakes that he's made in training camp so far, make up for some of the big plays that he's given? Because if you can do it in the game, people become a lot more forgivable or more willing to forgive you for it to a certain extent. It's definitely the step that he needs to take because if Emmanuel Forbes goes out there and gets abused, because it didn't really matter who the quarterback was. If 13 was on the field on defense with the Washington Commanders, it looked like they were just targeting him, which is something the Eagles did last year most prolifically, but certainly something that became a trend. And as a second-year cornerback, that position's already hard enough. You start getting picked on in the preseason along with the regular season, that's just when things are going to get worse and worse. So for me, he's the guy that really needs to step up. Now, John, a little bit of a lesser-known name on the other side of the ball for the Washington Commanders, Bryson Tremaine. This dude is incredibly tall, very athletic wide receiver, has been making plays all training camp long. And on Thursday, specifically in 7-on-7s, two passes from Marcus Mariota, Bryson Tremaine went up in two different athletic ways and made catches on both of those passes. One of them over DJ Reed, who I think Terry McLaurin said is a very underrated defender in the National Football League. I agree with him. So for Bryson Tremaine, an undrafted free agent out of Stanford in his second year, very much an unknown guy, spent the entire year last year on the practice squad. He is making plays. If he can make plays on Saturday afternoon, then I think that the way I put it, John, is he's putting himself in contention to be in contention for a roster spot. That's how I'm putting it right now because we're so early. But if he makes plays Saturday like he's been making in practice, he's going to put himself in contention for a roster spot on this team.
And just for context, if he's making plays on DJ Reed, that's a very good sign. DJ Reed is a heck of a corner. I mean, I think DJ Reed would be the number one corner on a lot of teams. And, he flies under the radar a bit with the Jets because they have Sauce Gardner, who's been a first team All Pro since he stepped on the field. But DJ Reed's an excellent corner. So I think that's a very, very positive sign, if he's able to make plays on that caliber of corner. And I'll go to the offensive side of the ball. There's a rookie who's been turning heads in Jets training camp, Braylon Allen, rookie, fourth round pick out of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
He's going to be the number two back behind Breece Hall, but he's a big back. Had a tremendous. He was a 17-year-old freshman in 2021, so he graduated a year. He graduated early. He should have been a senior in high school. He ran for almost 7 yards per carry at Wisconsin against the Big Ten, Big Ten competition. The last 2 years were good, but they weren't as good. But he's been a guy who's been impressing. He wasn't a huge part of Wisconsin's passing game, but the Jets have been utilizing him out of the backfield, starting in the offseason program and then during training camp. A guy who's been impressing people, but of course, as I think running backs are tough to judge in training camp practices just because the general lack of physicality. Even when they're wearing the pads, it doesn't have game intensity. I'm going to be interested to see how Braylon Allen does in an actual game situation where the other team can tackle him. Can he live up to what he's been doing in these practices? Can he look as bruising as he has? And will the Jets be able to utilize him in the receiving game? So that's the guy I got my eyes on the offensive side of the ball for the Jets.
Yeah, man, I dig it. Look, I talk very often with Wisconsin offensive coordinator Phil Longo, and I can tell you that Coach Longo is very proud of Braylon. Only had him for a year at Wisconsin. He just started there last year. Coach Longo did, but still, that 1 year, Braylon made quite the impact on him, and he's very excited to see what he can do in the National Football League as well. But everybody knows, Jets fans know it from just last season. Commanders fans know it from some history, from some other moments throughout the team history. If your quarterback goes down for the entirety of the season, most of the time, your year is pretty much lost. So, how far should teams go to protect the older quarterbacks, the younger quarterbacks, especially in the preseason? We're going to get into that conversation coming up next on this crossover episode of Locked On Jets and Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find qualified professionals that are right for the role you're trying to fill. And that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. But LinkedIn isn't just another job board. No, LinkedIn helps you find professionals and hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for new jobs, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn's users don't visit another leading job site. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like professionals on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, so they're always finding new ways to make hiring easier and making the process smoother. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids, activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. But we all need to have something in our self-care regimen that's a non-negotiable. Maybe you never skip leg day. Maybe you never skip doing yoga once a day, or maybe you never skip therapy day. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard for us to make time for it. Sometimes we even feel guilty doing things that make us feel better and that help take care of us. But it's incredibly important that you invest in yourself. So when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you will get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge as well. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Wrapping up this crossover episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Jets, we're going to turn our focus to the final segment here, to the quarterback position. Most important position on the field, most important position to an NFL franchise. Bottom line, guys, most NFL teams, if your starting quarterback goes down, the season is pretty much done. And the New York Jets obviously went through that last year. Like you said, brought in Tyrod Taylor to potentially protect against that a little bit. What's interesting, John, if Greg Zuerlein misses that game-winning field goal against the Washington Commanders, the Washington Commanders do not get Jaden Daniels. In fact, the Washington Commanders, I think, are drafting like 5th or 6th in the NFL draft if he misses that field goal. So it just, in a game of inches, it shows you how much all of that stuff really actually matters. Aaron Rodgers, John, how far should the Jets go? Well, how far do you think they're going to go, or have they gone so far? And how far should they go to try and protect Aaron Rodgers when just last year you guys saw like kind of just a fluke deal? You took a step one way, and next thing you know, you're out for the season.
Well, it's interesting because the Jets claim that if they were still in the playoff race, he would have played that game against Washington.
Yeah.
And man, I just don't understand that. So he was late last season. Like there were points where he was kind of warming up with the team, and I never realized I'd have to study as much about like medical stuff on Achilles injuries healing, and pretty much everything I could find suggested that it wasn't unusual for Rodgers to be able to run at that point. The issue
Yeah.
was more of the risk of re-injury was really high. So I got to be honest with you, if they actually were, I don't know that I believe they were going to do it. If they were,
Right.
I think last year that would have been pretty reckless because they would have risked his career if they put him on the field. This year it's a little different. This year, by all accounts, the injury is fully healed, and I think prior to yesterday, he had not missed a rep in the training camp. So I think they were pretty comfortable with that. Now, it doesn't sound like he's going to play at all in preseason. I don't think he's going to play this week. I don't think maybe he'll get a series or two in the third preseason game. That's what they did last year. They gave him 2 series in the preseason game. I'm actually a bit of a contrarian when it comes to the preseason. I've converted on this. I used to think preseason was totally useless. And then we had the COVID year where the preseason was completely canceled. And you actually saw, and there were actually studies on this, that statistically that year there were more injuries in the early part of the regular season, and
Yep.
maybe you could attribute it to guys not having time to prepare. Seems like teams are very cautious with their players these days. And I've talked about this on Locked On Jets, but how many times do you see like week 1, week 2, guys cramping up in the third and fourth quarter of games because they're not in football shape? And training camp practices these days are not as intense as they used to be. So there
Yeah.
aren't really any other ways to get yourself into football shape. Now there's a balance because Aaron Rodgers got injured 4 plays into the 2023 season. If Aaron Rodgers had played in preseason and suffered that injury then, Robert Saleh may have been fired. Like, it would have been one of the
Yeah.
hottest topics issues, one of the hottest button issues. So coaches, I think, have the incentive to not play their guys. And there's a balance. You don't want to like put an inordinate amount of injury risk on guys, but I feel like we've kind of swung the pendulum a little too far on the side of, trying to protect the players from injury, because I do think there's also a risk that your team's not completely in sync week 1, week 2, and those games
Mhm.
matter. Now, the only caveat I throw out there is I do feel like a player like Rodgers has the stature that he can decide how much he really needs. I think there might be some utility just him like getting used to running routes, throwing to new receivers, seeing how they run routes. But I do trust a quarterback like Rodgers more than I trust somebody else, because like when you're a future Hall of Famer, I think you've earned the right to decide how much preparation you need. I mean, Peyton Manning was famous for never setting foot on the field in preseason. So I guess
Yeah.
the answer is a little bit nuanced. I think in general, teams maybe my view is that teams maybe veer a little bit too much on the side of not playing their guys, but I do understand why the Jets might keep Rodgers off the field.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. I think context is a big part of this, right? Like who the quarterback is, what the circumstances are. I think has everything to do with it. And you're right, Aaron Rodgers has earned the right. Like as weird as some of us think some of his things that he does are, he's earned the right, to kind of have a say or have all the say in that. And he was out there with his teammates. Like let's not get it mistaken that he was like sitting at home, nice and dry while his teammates were out there getting torrential rain poured on them. He was out there on the field. I actually saw him talking with Jane Daniels a little bit. So it'd be really cool to kind of find out what they talked about on the practice field there. And then on the other side of this thing, you have that young rookie quarterback in Jane Daniels, and Joe Theismann, Washington legend, quarterback, Super Bowl winning quarterback, actually went on the record on the radio here in the DC area, or well, there in Jersey, but in the DC area, and said that not only should Jaden Daniels not play a single snap in the preseason, but he will not play. And it sounded like Joe was coming from a place of knowledge, but alas, here we are, and not only is Jaden Daniels playing in the preseason, he's starting against the Jets on Saturday. We don't know how long Jaden's going to be in there, but the question, obviously, ever since that announcement was made, is it smart for the Commanders to put him out there? And I will say this: that I've been on kind of the side of maybe erring on the side of caution a little bit. If you get a really good joint practice in, if your training camp is really effective, you can still get him game ready without necessarily putting him out there in the preseason too much. I think he still needed a little bit of time. However, I will say that I'm changing my tune a little bit after seeing that Jets pass rush get after it, because while you can look at the offensive line and say, well, the O line needs to protect them better and all this, and that's great, that's 100% accurate. I watched Jaden go from 7-on-7s, where obviously there's no pass rush at all, and he's dropping dimes. And I mean, he's dropping passes over DJ Reed. He's dropping passes in the middle of the field. Didn't target Sauce Gardner at all, just for the record. But he's dropping passes on the
Smart
sideline.
guy.
Yeah, very smart guy. But then you get to the 11s, and now the pass rush is coming in. Now there's guys in his face, and you could see a little bit of that rattling happen. There was a completion he actually had to Luke McCaffrey, where Shane Daniels actually held the ball too long. By the time he delivered the ball, Luke had to, in full stride in the rain, turn his body essentially completely around 180 to make the catch. He did it, and that's great. But that is something that, watching Jaden through training camp so far, kind of stuck out, because like, that's not something he's really been doing in practice. So you kind of saw a little bit of that rookie come out, which of course is going to happen. And so I think the value of putting him out there and saying, look, let's get some of these experiences out of the way. Now, the other side of that, where I'm going to go back conservative a little bit, is with this offensive line. Because if the Jets come out there and they're getting pressure and Will McDonald is getting in, or anybody else is getting in, I don't know if I want them out there for longer than a series, to be quite honest with you. And if you have 10 plays, I might ask you to run it like 7 times. You know what I mean? Let's throw the ball 3 times. Let's run it. I do expect some screen passes. I do expect some quick routes, which the Jets might be expecting as well. So you might see an interception if one of them gets really bold and decides to jump a route. I mean, preseason highlights don't count for stats, but they sure do give you some name recognition. And preseason touchdowns don't really count for anything either. So it'll be interesting to see how the Jets defense adjusts. But I'm with you. in some, or I'm with you in the group that you talked about being overly conservative at times. But again, after seeing the young quarterback go out there and get a little bit rattled for the first time I've seen him this training camp, I do think that the experience is certainly valuable.
Yeah, if I had a rookie quarterback and I did not have my starting offensive line, he would not see the field because I don't think good things come from that. I don't think putting your young quarterback in a meaningless game with a backup offensive line is going to do anything good for you. So that I would say in that situation, if I was the coach and I could not put my starting five out there on the line, the rookie's not getting in the game.
Yeah, and that's where I typically lean. Like I said, that's typically where I lean. My confidence is a little bit in Cliff Kingsbury. It's interesting. I don't want to get too deep into it. I talked about it on my episode. So if Jets fans are curious at all, Cliff Kingsbury, kind of in the middle of the team sessions there against the Jets, we saw him kind of adjust the plays that he was calling to give Jaden better opportunities to get the ball out quick. And I think that's really interesting because in a practice where you know he's not supposed to get hit or allowed to get hit, you can oftentimes see offensive coordinators say, "Yeah, dude, we're going to dial up the deep passes anyway. If you get practice sacks, just keep the play alive, deliver the ball. I want to see you get the ball downfield." But instead, Cliff actually gave his quarterback quicker possibilities, screen routes or screen passes, things like that. And I thought that was really interesting that a coach did that in a practice scenario because I think that's, the coaches are practicing game management as well and game flow as well. So I thought that was a really cool little detail. But I'm with you, man. Like, honestly, if we found out on Friday or Saturday morning or whatever, as the Dan Quinn's changed his mind, he's like, we're not going to put Jaden out there just yet. I would not be disappointed, but I do expect him to still play. My nerves get to the point where if you drop him back more than 3 times, I'm going to get nervous about that game. So a lot of the things to consider. Kind of shows you a little bit of the nuance of what the coaches are going through as well. Because I'm sure as people are listening to this conversation, they've all got their opinions as well. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. We'll come back, Locked On Jets, Locked On Commanders. We'll talk about that game on our respective channels. So make sure you're coming through for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, throw them down in the YouTube comment sections or get a hold of us the way that you normally do. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders, Locked On Jets your first listens of the day. Now go check out Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, your daily insight to the best fantasy football strategies that will help you win your league this season. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders, Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day, every day. Thanks for coming through like you do. And until we all speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. We will see you right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders or Locked On Jets, both part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.